When we last met up, we talked a little bit about the legislative drivers that are driving the change in sustainability and ESG. How is some of the legislation driving the accountability and credibility within the measurement and reporting?
Well, obviously, it's a good thing to have a set of criteria by which we can all report, because I think we said at the beginning, the purpose of reporting is so people can compare.
Yeah.
And if everyone's not reporting on the same basis and that data is not audited, it's hard to trust it and to compare it. And it has been a slight Wild West in the past when it's come to sustainability reporting. So I think it's a good thing that this legislation is creating a level playing field. So the first thing that's really been getting traction over the last couple of years is the task force on climate-related disclosures. So this is a requirement for a set of disclosures on that first angle of materiality. So this is more about investors wanting to know how climate change is a risk to your business, whether that's because of physical impacts like floods, or whether that's because of transition impacts. So carbon pricing, which is going to make your emissions more expensive.
Market risk.
Exactly. Yeah. So that they're looking to say, at what risk does this company have in its balance sheet to climate impacts? That's now mandatory, as people probably know, in the UK for big companies, and it will be for smaller companies going forward. The other really key bit that's going on in the EU at the moment is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, known as CSRD. I'm trying to spell out all the acronyms rather than just using the letters. So this came into force in January last year, and this is basically aligning sustainability reporting approaches for companies in Europe or companies in the UK that have got a large piece of business in Europe, which I think Paragon is one of. So there's a set of standards that companies will have to report to in Europe around that. And the government in the UK has said that they want to do something similar. They're behind where the EU is on it. But there's going to be something called the UK Sustainability Disclosure Standard, which will similarly set like rules and guidelines about how to report on these different impacts.
Another acronym.
They're hoping to align it with ISSB, which is something that's been established for a long time about reporting on sustainability in the UK. So the idea is to try and align it to what everyone else is doing before, but we all know there's always extra bells and whistles that you have to take into account. But across all these things, I think it's a decision that you can make as a firm, whether to treat this as a sort of tick box exercise. Okay, we'd have to gather this data because we have to report on it. Let's do it from a compliance perspective. Or you can really use the insight that data collection drives and the conversations you have around the difficulty of accessing the data and how you're going to address that going forward to actually reshape your business and to inform what we were saying at the beginning, how you need to put sustainability into your strategy and to differentiate yourself to be a leader in that space. So it can either be a chore or you can use it as key management information, as we were talking about earlier.
I think we've found these types of legislation, around disclosure really helpful for starting to integrate ESG reporting with financial reporting, because you have to involve those other departments and teams from across the business to actually get to the data that you need. It's been absolutely crucial in spreading that work across the business as well, and really
widening the
integrating
accountability.
and really widening that accountability within the business.
And the legislation sets a level playing field. Because as a business, you don't want to be rushing. You don't necessarily want to rushing ahead. Maybe you do want to rush ahead on some of those things you can strategically differentiate on. But it means everybody's moving together to raise the bar around these issues, and it's also improving transparency. As I said, it was hard for people before to really trust non-audited, non-standardized data. But it is also difficult though, because every business has different sustainability impacts. So water might be really important for one business, or plastics, whereas for another business it might be much more about the social side. But if you're a business that doesn't really make much and you're a people business, but I think there had to be some kind of common denominator about the approaches to reporting across the board.
And that's a whole new experience, having your work scrutinised by auditors as well, I found for the first time.
Hopefully the questions they ask are kind of useful.
It's the terminology, I think, getting scripts for the terminology.
So you're saying the same things, but calling it different things.
Yes, absolutely. Do you think the legislation is going far enough at the moment to drive the change that's needed?
I think businesses are struggling to keep up with what's happening on the reporting side. I think legislation on reporting is probably going as far as it needs to be, but there's probably other forms of legislation that would be helpful. I think many of us are crying out for there to be a carbon price or a plastic tax. I think there are other ways, there are other levers that legislation could be pulling. But then at the same time, I've got experience of trying to work with government. We were part of the consultation around the Green Deal when I was working at Homebase.
Okay.
They never really can fully understand the implications of how legislation actually impacts businesses and how it's implemented. And sometimes if they get too involved in detailed legislation, it can have unintended consequences. So I think the more that businesses can actually get together to self-regulate and drive standards from a position of understanding of the art of the possible, that can be helpful as well.
Yeah, I think businesses are starting to take responsibility regardless of the legislation now as well.
Yeah, and the legislation's I think that the role of the legislation is more is to make sure that the laggards, keeping the laggards moving forward rather than actually leading.
Yes, and to develop that level playing field across, the accountability and the reporting standards as well. Yeah.
But then the last thing I just wanted to add on this reporting front was I'm sure most of you have heard of TCFD, which is the climate reporting one. There's also something called what is it called? I've lost my notes.
The TNFD.
TNFD, Task Force on Nature-Related Disclosures, which is doing something similar around biodiversity reporting, which we kind of would expect to see come into play for bigger companies maybe as early as 2025.
Yeah, I think having some frameworks for that would be crucial because, again, carbon reporting is quite well established now, but how to even yes, nowhere near in terms of the financial reporting.
That's like
but
thousands of years.
Still relatively new, but yes, relatively well established. But getting started on even assessing your nature and biodiversity related risks is kind of a much trickier starting point. So
definitely,
we're really welcoming the legislation around that and the reporting.
And the good thing with TFND is that they've got really good guidance on how to start approaching thinking about it. So I think that's the good thing, is that there's that time to really start getting your head around how to start thinking about it before the legislation actually hits you.
Yes, definitely. And we tend to get hit in the second round of legislation for these things, but we feel the impact from our clients who will get impacted kind of when it's first released as well. We start to see the questions flow down into our supply chain as well. So, we like to try and stay ahead of that legislative journey as well.